refers to the opening in the lens through which light passes as it enters the camera.
As Charlotte just said, the aperture in your lens is just the hole in the middle of your lens that allows light to pass through to the sensor in the back. All it does is control the amount of light at any given time. Its secondary purpose, on the other hand, is to control the depth of field of the lens, meaning how much in focus it is from back to front. So anything that is here, anything behind it, isn't in focus. So if you can see what I mean by that, if I put up my hand, not sure if it's focusing on there, I'm hoping it is, but it focuses on there, and then everything behind it was blurry, just like what's behind me is blurry right now. Aperture is measured in f-stops, and f-stops are figured out by taking the focal length of your lens and dividing it by the aperture diameter. You can imagine that as your focal length gets longer, you might need a much wider aperture in order to get the same low f-stop. Rather than just talking about this stuff, why don't I actually show you how all of this stuff works? Have a look at what this old Nikon lens looks like when you have the aperture wide open. On the top left, you can see that I'm at f1.2. So when the smaller the number for your f-stop, the larger the opening on your lens. This means that more light is let in through the lens to the sensor behind it. At the same time, you're also getting the shallowest depth of field, or the most blur behind your subject. As you move over to the right, you'll notice even at f2, we've already close the lens up by quite a bit. It's almost half as much, or probably less than half as much light being let in at this point. And moving on to f2.8, same thing, getting much smaller very quickly. And even when we get to f.6, which is a very common aperture for people to shoot in, the opening in the lens is really tiny. So you can imagine that if you're shooting indoors, you're not going to get hardly any light compared to what you are at f1.2. And again, moving on to f1.8 through up to f16. F16 lets what looks like almost no light, but I can tell you right now you can shoot in full sunlight at f16 and even as fast as 1/200th of a second, and you should have perfect exposure given those settings. Let's try that with an actual photo outside. In this demonstration of aperture and how it affects your photos, I'm going to be taking a photo of Charlotte using a 55mm lens, and I'm going to start at f1.8 to show you what it looks like in camera. So Charlotte's looking at me here. I'm focusing on her eye, and when I take the photo, click, now you can see the back of the camera, or what's in the background of Charlotte rather, and how it affects it. Everything's nice and blurred out. What's in the back is more of a texture than anything else. I'm going to show you what it looks like at f4. But what I also have to do at the same time is I have to bring my shutter speed way low to compensate for how much less light is coming into the camera. So here we are, f4, and now we'll see what it looks like in the back. I'm going to try one more though at f8, and you'll get a real sense to what a difference that makes. Now we're going to extremely slow shutter speeds. This may be blurry. Took a bunch just in case, and then look at the background. Let's have a look. Here's a look at those same photos at full screen. The only thing that you'll really notice a difference between one photo and the next here is the background. The background in all of these photos, it changes as you make the aperture smaller. This is the widest aperture that I'm able to use on my 55mm lens, which is f1.8. Take a look how nice and smooth this whole area back here is. And it makes everything in the back look more like a texture and improves the separation of Charlotte from the background. Separation meaning that it looks more three-dimensional. So now if we go to f4, which is a very typical aperture to use for most cameras, especially ones that aren't as expensive, and so they have a smaller starting aperture, you'll notice that the background suddenly is way more in focus. So this is f4. Moving back to f1.8, you'll see how it's much smoother on f1.8 and already looking quite a bit more in focus in the back. Now moving up to f8, everything is quite in focus now. So it almost looks like Charlotte is part of the background. It even looks like that tree in the back is possibly growing out of her back. It's not, by the way. One thing to keep in mind when you are photographing with lenses that is just because you can get a blurred background doesn't make it a better lens, especially for the given situation. Next, we're going to take a look at images that actually require a very wide depth of field, meaning that everything is more in focus. Let's have a look at some examples of what situations you would use one aperture over another. In these examples I'm showing you now, I'm showing you how I used aperture to either accentuate certain things, make other things less prominent, or embellish photos with foreground and background elements. In this first one, it's focused on a father and daughter dance here, where I've used lights in the foreground to make it a little more interesting. In the next photo, this is a couple photo. The focus is on the couple's face, and everything else is more like a tunnel looking through them in a cornfield. In these ones, all the foreground elements for this couple photo create this greenish blur haze that makes it a little more interesting than just having the couple on their own. This is a commercial shoot for with an interior where I'm shooting at f9 and trying to get everything completely in focus. It makes everything a lot crisper and cleaner. Now this one, another couple photo. The couple is not blended in with the back because the background is further, and I'm shooting at f1.8. Here again, another couple shot. I wanted to accentuate those Christmas lights in the back by having them blurry. So again, shooting at f1.8, focus on the couple's face. This is a commercial portrait taken at a conference. So this is obviously a very broadly or a deep photo where I want all the faces in focus. So everybody in the front and back is in focus. Even though I'm only shooting at f4.5, I'm using a wide angle lens, so I don't need to be quite as wide. The reason I'm shooting at f4.5 and not f8 is just because it's hard to get enough flash power for a group that size. This is a commercial interior photo of the House of Commons for the Canadian Parliament, and everything's in focus. Again, I'm shooting a very broad aperture, probably f8, and that's it. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was ISO and what it does with your camera. ISO simply just makes your sensor either more or less sensitive. So the lower the ISO number, the lower the sensitivity of your lens. This can be used to allow you to shoot in darker conditions, or allows you to have more open apertures and things like that with a lower ISO. It doesn't do anything else to the actual image itself other than reduces or increases the amount of grain that you have in it, which when it's ISO noise isn't a good thing, but I'll show you a couple of examples of that as well. So that about does it for this episode on Aperture and ISO. Please send us any questions that you have and we'll answer them in the next video. The good news is that now I think we're done with all of the technical stuff in terms of just describing what things are. Now it's time for us to be a little more creative. In the next video, we're going to be taking ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, and I'll show you how to properly expose an image using all your automated features and also using just manual settings. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and are enjoying this series. If so, please like this video and please subscribe so that you're notified every time another one comes up. In the meantime, stay safe inside your houses, keep that 6 foot or 2 meter distance from everybody, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.